Hello, everybody. Karan, hello.
Hi, Hugo.
How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. So,
Good. So we'll just wait just to make sure we've got a few people joining, and then
okay,
we'll get going.
absolutely, yeah.
I'm hoping we'll get some folk UK based, some folk from overseas.
Yes, a combination of the two is good.
Okay. Well, shall we start?
Okay, let's start. Yes, good idea.
So, just by way of an introduction, so my name is Hugo Simpson. I run a company called Lawton Scott. We are a communication training organization. And in really simple terms, I work with clients to help shape, mold, deliver both written and verbal communication. I've built a business on the back of most managers spend about 45 minutes of every hour either writing or talking to people. So that's very much my world, the art of persuasion. I've been working with Karan for over 10 years in this space of managing difficult conversations. So, Karan, would you like to do just a little bit of an intro before we get going?
Yes, just a very short one. As Hugo said, we've worked together for many, many years, probably more than we want to remember. But my background originally is in sales and marketing. I was national sales manager for a Japanese company based here in the UK. Since then, I'm also a trained actor, and what I do now is I'm a qualified executive coach. I do a lot of work around difficult conversations, challenging conversations, what makes them so, many different types of organizations in many different parts of the world when that was possible.
Brilliant, thank you. So rather than me just talking today, given it is conversations, the clue is in the title, I wanted to make this a slightly more interactive session with Karan. So we're going to be taking you through some of the core components that constitute a difficult conversation and what we can do to put ourselves, our best selves forward when we're in that situation. And part of the work Karan and I do with clients is always an experiential bit. I get Karan to take on the characteristics that a client would typically find difficult, both in terms of situation and personality type. Karan takes on that situation, that person. But we're not going to do that today. What I thought would be useful is just to have a think about the word assertiveness, because I think having a difficult conversation when we aren't being that assertive version of us makes the whole process much, much more challenging. And from Karen and I's perspective, having worked with many thousands of people in this arena over the years, there's often confusion around what assertiveness actually is, what assertive communication is. So we're going to start off by having a look at what we describe as the assertiveness spectrum that looks at 4 different characteristics. You have passive communication, you have passive aggressive communication, you have aggressive communication, and you have assertive communication. So we're going to do a little scenario where we're going to play out one of those different characteristics. You have to, everyone watching, work out which of the 4 behaviors we are demonstrating in our scenario, and really have a think about, from a body language perspective, from a vocal perspective, why you arrived at that conclusion. Not going to be rocket science, by the way. It's more about what you see and hear that's important here. So the scenario we are going to play out, very straightforward. I am Karan's boss. And Karan has been managing our biggest client project that is due to finish end of play on the Wednesday evening. And it's now Monday morning. I had emailed Karan on Friday evening, voicing my concerns because I'd spoken to a couple of his team who were concerned they didn't think the project was going to be completed. And to cap it all off, Karan is going on holiday on Thursday morning, first thing Thursday morning. So I've asked Karan in for a meeting just to get an update on what is going on. You're looking at Karan's behaviours, not mine. And I want you to work out, is he demonstrating passive, passive-aggressive, aggressive or assertive communication? Okay, so Karan, when you are ready. So
Okay.
Karan, thank you for joining the meeting.
Is it still a good time for you?
Yeah. Fine. Thank you. So look, I sent you an email on Friday, early evening, and I've not had a response back. And I'd spoken to a couple of your team, and I'm just concerned, if I'm honest, that you're not going to get this done by end of play on Wednesday. As you know, obviously, this is our most high-profile client. So I had asked in the email for you to bring me along an overview of how you were going to get this completed.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I haven't got back to you before. Quite a busy weekend, but I know that's not an excuse. I have, of course, read your email, and what I've done, I've come up with some options of the way we might be able to.
Okay, I have to be honest, Karan, at this stage, I'm not really interested in options. I just want a really simple overview of how you're going to get this completed. Have you managed to bring that along?
Apologies, I have actually brought. So I would like us obviously to be on the same page regarding how we move forward with it. So I've got some thoughts as to what we might look at and discuss and formulate a way forward. Maybe from apologies if that's not quite what you.
Okay, so Karan, I'm going to make a suggestion. We're now at around 9:30. If I could ask you, please, to meet me face to face at 12:30 p.m. this afternoon. I really need you to go away and come up with something concrete, please, for me, as per my email.
Yes, I'm sorry if that's not exactly what you want to do. I do apologize.
If you feel there are going to be some challenges, then you're going to have to think about how we're going to overcome them. Because, as I said, you've been working on this for over 6 months, Karan, and this does seem to be a bit of a repeated pattern here. Okay.
Well, I mean, again, apologise if communication's not been 100% clear from my side. I do apologise for that. But yes, of course, happy to meet with you at 12:30 in person, so we can talk this through. That's fine. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for meeting, Karan.
Okay.
Right. So quick time out, everyone. I am assuming, given I can't see anyone, that you're all in agreement that was passive. And I think worth just having to think about what you saw, what you heard from Karan that would possibly make you think that was passive. How are you feeling in that scenario, Karan?
I'm feeling a little bit perhaps back-footed. I'm feeling that using apology is a good way of buying myself more time, possibly. But I'm coming away from that meeting not feeling that I have any need at this particular moment to come up with a concrete set of plans. Nick has agreed with us that that's passive. Thank you, Nick. Nick is overseas, wherever you are, Nick. Thank you.
So let's just have a think about the characteristics that we might see when somebody's being passive.
Exactly. What makes it passive? Yeah.
So I
Seems
think
to be clearly passive, but kept interrupting.
So it felt a little aggressive. Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, I mean, typically with passive, you tend to see somebody in sort of low physical and vocal energy, often too nice, not really owning their voice, if you like. So very frustrating being on the receiving end, even though Caron is telling me what I kind of want to hear. There's no sense of coming up with anything concrete or actually making me feel confident that he's going to get this done. And there's a very useful axis that aligns to the assertiveness spectrum. And on one side, we have consideration for the other person, and the other side, we have courage. And passive is very high consideration for the other person, but very low courage. So a reluctance to really own where they're coming from. Exactly, Nick. Passive body language, passive voice. So very much about putting the other person's needs ahead of our own.
Exactly. And just to pick up on that, Nick, thank you for that comment about passive body language. The elements that often make it passive are the volume, physical volume. Also, the energy tends to go inwards. So there's this pulling away, this withdrawing, this perhaps making oneself slightly smaller, all those things that minimize the presence in the conversation and in the room. We'll also think about that point about perhaps coming across as a little aggressive, because part of what we're doing in showing you the spectrum is the confusion about what is aggressive and what in fact perhaps isn't, that we're misinterpreting. So thank you for that comment as well.
So we'll take the slides off for a second. We're going to do the same scenario now, but a different behavior. Okay, so Caron.
Yes, yes, morning. Look, this email, can you explain what this email is about you sent to me?
So
well,
Caron,
you don't explain. I understand what it's about.
So Caron, please, just it's extremely frustrating when you're talking over me. I had sent you an email on Friday.
Yes, I know you sent me an email. Yes, I got the email. I understand all of that.
Outlining my concerns that the project wasn't going to get completed.
Look, Hugo, we have, if I may just get a word in edgeways, we have talked about this many times. I'm very well aware it's a high-profile client because you keep saying it's a high-profile client. I'm also very well aware that I'm not the only team leader involved in this project. And we have discussed many times the fact that you cannot assume that if an additional piece of work that comes in that is out of scope, that it lands on my desk with the assumption that I will automatically be able to take care of it. We've talked about this before, the way that this task is distributed. Sorry?
Aggressive.
Okay. Thank you.
I think we would all agree that that was aggressive. But what's interesting is there are similar characteristics to assertive communication, certainly from a body language point of view, which is often why people confuse the two. So again, just thinking about what made that aggressive. Well, we'll have a look at some of the characteristics that would be typically present in aggressive communication. So very explosive. It can feel out of control, incredibly rigid boundaries, brilliantly aggressive. I'm glad you agree with that, Nick.
I'd love to know what Nick means by brilliantly aggressive. We might ask him in a second.
Well, we will do. We'll definitely ask him. So I think on the receiving end, incredibly frustrating, completely undermining my authority as his boss, not being able to get a word in edgeway, and just incredibly difficult to manage somebody when they are in that very aggressive space. And of course, I mean, interestingly, Caron, no lack of clarity around the message. So a complete comfort in saying what you wanted to say. But from a collaboration point of view, it was completely, or it felt like it was completely about you. What was going on with you in that?
Well, to be honest, it feels quite cathartic for me in a sense, because I can get across exactly what I want to say. But there's no intention to have any space for anything coming back from you. The intention is not two-way. The intention is to offload, to make it quite clear what I feel, what I'm prepared to do, what I'm not prepared to do. There's no consideration at all about what's happening with you, or in that moment, in fact, what's happening with the project. Simply to download this message and win, basically, in terms of the communication. That thank you, Nick. That's Oscar worthy. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, to win in that conversation.
So not a win-win, because it wasn't about
win.
This was about you winning and making sure you got what you wanted. And when we think about the axes again, well, I think it would be fair to say very low consideration for me, but very high courage. So we will do one more example. So if we
just before we do that, I'd like to pick up again on the difference in body language. You will see, I think that is quite different. It's vocally quite loud. It's physically quite forward. If that was face to face, it would be quite intimidating and overbearing. But the energy is an energy that's going forward, whether that's appropriate or not. Compared to the passive example, this energy is very much out rather than in. So I think it's worth just noticing those differences.
Yeah, thank you. Right, so slides off. We'll demonstrate one more. Just to respond quickly to Nick's question, was there an element of defensiveness in it? Well, Karan, how would you respond to that? Because I think absolutely yes.
Well, this is very interesting in terms of what we're talking about today, in terms of difficult conversations and challenging conversations. These are all things, Nick, that can be unpacked. We'll come to some of this later. The only way we can know whether there was an element of defensiveness in it is to, if it's appropriate, unpack that separately or later in the conversation. But it's a very, very good point. We don't know is the answer. And we often have the reasons why challenging conversations can remain challenging, or if you like, unresolved, or in fact, one of the possible reasons is that we tend to make assumptions without probing. So we'll think about that as we move forward. But that's an open question, Nick. We don't know. Was there an element of defensiveness in it? Probably.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Right, so Karan, final scenario.
Hi, how are you?
Karan, fine. I sent you an email on Friday early evening.
Oh yes, I got the email. That's yes, 9:45 on Friday evening. That's right. Yeah, 9:46. Yes, I got that. Thank you.
Right. I mean, I wasn't aware of specific time. I think the important thing from my perspective, Karan, is I was still in the office at 9:45, and I hadn't realised it was so late.
But I'm sorry.
And the reason I was in the office, a couple of your team, and I won't mention who, but a couple of your team had come to me on Friday very concerned that there is a huge amount of work left before we get this project signed off on Wednesday, and I've only just found out you're off on holiday on Thursday morning, I believe.
Oh gosh, I'm amazed you've just found out, Hugo. I'm sorry about that. We did discuss it at some length. I would be taking the first break abroad for 4 years. But no, I know you're very busy. So
that's a separate issue that we will discuss when you're back. I'd sent the email.
I'm sure we will. Yes.
I had sent the email. Have you come with an overview of how you're going to get this complete?
Well, Hugo, thanks for the email. And I know you've recently joined us, and you have your own ways of working, which
right.
We all respect.
Sorry, Karan. Just factoring in time. Very, very simple question. Have you come with that overview I requested?
Well, Hugo, I do know, as you do tell us quite often, that you're a very busy man. So I've come with something better than that. I've come with an assurance, as always, that I will.
Yeah, I'm not interested in an assurance, Ron. I had specifically said in my email that I would like an overview, a written
Yes.
overview that you and I could go through, outlining how you are going to get this done. I
Well,
don't need to mention the reputational impact this is going to have.
of course. No, you
So,
don't need to mention
so
that. You go, no, of course, because you mentioned it.
if you
Sorry.
haven't brought along the outline, can I suggest that you spend the next couple of hours putting it together for me?
Well, yes, I can certainly do that. I mean, my assurance is more concrete than the outline. But if you'd like the outline still,
You've given
I
me
can
your
put
assurance, Ron, to be fair, 2 weeks ago
Yes.
that you were on track, and
Absolutely.
we're
Yeah.
now 3 days away, and I'm not sure that any assurances are what's required at the moment.
Well, I'm sorry that you feel like that. Interesting that
Okay.
you felt it more appropriate to talk to
So it's not about what I'm feeling.
Yes.
This is about where we are at and the gap between what needs to be done by end of play on Wednesday.
Well, what I was saying was my assurance is that any gap will be bridged by me between now and Thursday morning. I'll do whatever it needs to be done, even doing an all-nighter or whatever. So, you can rest assured.
We can work out how we're going to do this. Can I suggest, please?
Please do.
Can I suggest, please, that we re-meet at 12:30, and we can go through the overview then?
No problem at all. Hugo, I will put aside all the other important matters I'm working on just at the moment, and certainly we can meet at 12:30. That's no problem at all. Anything else I can do at all?
No, Karan, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Okay. Thanks for your time, Hugo. Thank you.
Deeply frustrating being on the receiving end. It's a really interesting one, assuming that we all felt that was passive aggressive.
I think that's the general feeling. I'd be wanting to punch him, probably.
Possibly a little extreme, but I'm not surprised you felt that. It's a really interesting one, passive aggressive, because if you were to transcribe what Karan had actually said in the written form, it would probably be fine. But it's the undertone, it's the sarcastic tone that is what makes someone being passive aggressive so difficult to deal with. Because surfacely, being perfectly charming and polite, but you know perfectly well that there's a lack of congruence between what Karan was saying and how he was saying, and that makes it very frustrating. So just to get up our slides again, and we'll just take you through some of the qualities, characteristics of passive aggressive. Excuses, very much denying what he's feeling. So Karan, interestingly, in this scenario, it was quite evident to me that you were building up, harboring longer term feelings of frustration that you quite clearly, for whatever reason, hadn't vocalized or didn't feel comfortable.
Yeah, that's the passive part. Often in a passive aggressive conversation or behavior, the person has something they either feel or want to say or need to air, but they don't have the assertiveness or required behaviors to be able to say that. So what comes across strongly in a conversation is, I'm undermining what you're talking about, but I'm not brave enough, if you like, or courageous enough to say what it is I want to say, to raise what I want to say, to raise, or to discuss what's causing me problems. So it remains in this manipulative, undermining behavior.
And very much playing the victim. So very much you're the person, despite it being your project, which you've been running for 6 months, you're the person who is quite evidently the victim in this scenario and the overrun potentially, rather than any accountability and taking any ownership. So again, as your boss, incredibly frustrating trying to manage that, and lots of little digs about the fact that I'm new and kind of the implication, what do I really know? Me coming in with my new working methods, So again, those kind of sort of backhanded, sly comments. And if we look at our axes, low courage, low consideration. So not really a win for anyone in this scenario.
No,
so
exactly.
Karan, from your perspective, if we were to think about what that might have looked like had you been coming to the meeting in a more assertive way, what do you think that would have looked like? What would we have seen, heard? What would you have possibly said, do you think?
It's interesting because I think one of the things that would certainly happen is respect for the other person. I think the other thing that would be important is that this is that there's a clear message. What can I do? What can't I do? And there is an intention that both of us are okay. Hugo's okay, I'm okay. And that there's a solution focus. I think that's really, really important as well. Two-way, confident. The other thing that's really, really important, I think, in assertive behavior is being comfortable, if it's appropriate, with no. I'm not able to do this. Let's look at a solution. Or I'm not able to do this without X, Y, and Z. Let's look at a solution. The other thing I think that's really important in assertive conversations and challenging conversations generally is, and this tends to go missing if the conversation is challenging because we tend to feel stressed and anxious and so forth, the ability to listen, give evidence that we've listened, and ask appropriate questions. Particularly the question asking, I find, goes out the window. So these are some important things to bear in mind. There's a question that from Rubin and Company, is this based in Europe? SCO is UK based. I see. Okay, I think that's been answered. We're based in London, by the way.
So, firm. I think that clarity of message is so important. And that clarity of message, as you rightly say, Karan, that might not be the message I want to hear, but it's having the confidence to say no, but doing it in a very collaborative win-win way. So that you're not just saying no and then placing the responsibility on me. You're saying, no, we're not going to get this done, but I've spoken to the relevant people, for example, and I've come up with a solution. So I think it's that collaboration space that's so important. And because there can often be a lot of body language, strong vocal energy, it often gets confused with aggressive behavior. And if we look at our axes again, no surprise that ultimately it's high courage and it's high consideration. So it's that win-win bit that's really important. It's about both parties coming out on top rather than focusing on one person.
There's a couple of additional points I think are really important with assertive behavior. One phrase I've seen under the definition of assertive behavior, which I think is quite important to bear in mind, which I like. If you have listened, if it's collaborative, if it's two-way, and if your listening is genuine, one thing you might think about in terms of assertive behavior is the ability to change your mind based on what you've heard. I think that's really, really important. The other thing I think it's really important is feelings. Normally, if a conversation is charged or difficult or challenging, there are feelings or emotions involved. Normally, frankly, on both sides, maybe on one side. So one aspect of assertive behavior is being able to describe whatever feelings you have as they're appropriate, rather than demonstrating them, as we saw in the aggressive behavior. That's just behaving in that way that is defensive, perhaps, as Nick said. It's overbearing. It's very, very challenging. Being able to describe what you're feeling is assertive rather than simply demonstrating it. That's really, really important.
Yeah, totally agree. Right, so we are going to now have a look at a model that is really helpful when it comes to being in a situation where you're having to manage a difficult conversation, difficult behaviors. based on something called transactional analysis, which for those of you that might have heard of transactional analysis, it's a hugely complex subject matter, but this particular model Caron and I use is a very simplified version, and it can take us from being a bit reactive in our communication when we're having a difficult conversation into being far more proactive, and helps us to really not just observe other people's behavior, but to really take a sense of ownership on our own behavior and how we are responsible for changing the dynamics of a conversation. And it's very much linked to the assertiveness spectrum. So I will take you through the different characteristics of the house, and hopefully you can start to have a think about how this might be relevant to the interactions that you're involved with. So it's called the house for a rather obvious reason. It looks a bit like a house. And at the top left-hand side, certainly from my view, we have what we call the critical parent. Often similar to those aggressive characteristics, you can tell when somebody goes into critical parent mode. They become very scolding, reprimanding. Sorry, Caron, I asked for that document 20 minutes ago. You still haven't provided it. Will you go away, please, now and find it for me? Often, lots of body language, often can be quite vocally domineering and very much about me rather than that more collaborative approach. Now, the opposite side of the critical parent, we have what we call the nurturing parent. People who have a propensity to go into nurturing parent can often be incredibly supportive. The clue's in the title, they can nurture. The challenge for people, particularly managing teams, is we can often over-nurture and we can lose all our authority, particularly when it comes to managing perhaps a difficult conversation with somebody more junior in the organization. And there is often a sense of not wanting to offend. People who often over-nurture very much want to be liked, but can very quickly lose their assertiveness when they're in a difficult conversation situation. Bottom of the house, we have what we call the adapted child, which is very linked to that passive communication that we were talking about. So high consideration for the other person, people, but very low courage. You can often see when somebody is in adapted child mode because they have very limited physical and vocal energy. So you'll often get somebody more junior in a meeting who is scared of having a voice, whether it's potentially saying something inappropriate or getting something wrong. So they end up letting the more senior people do all the talking and end up almost sat there in silence, which of course, from the other people's perspective, they're often thinking, well, why is this person even in the meeting? So again, it's about not having a voice, low courage. The final box, what we call free child. Now, people who have, again, a propensity to go into free child can often be very charismatic, extremely confident, likable, but often mavericks. So they very much do what feels appropriate for themselves. So again, high courage, but often low consideration. So someone who is likely to go into free child, you're never quite sure what they're going to do, what they're going to say. They can be great team players 1 minute, completely dismissive the next. There is an unpredictability to people who go into free child. I think from a global stage, the two personalities that come to mind who you would probably associate with free child would be Mr. Johnson, Boris Johnson, and Donald Trump. they would be the two examples I would say of classic free child behavior. Now, what I am not suggesting for 1 second is we are one of those personality types, and fundamentally that is who we are defined as. I think even during the course of a meeting, we can bounce from place to place. But the important point is trying to work out, if I am somewhere in the house, is it the appropriate place for me to be in terms of meeting my objectives? I remember, gosh, going back about 5 or 6 years ago, one of our clients is Sky, and the ex-head of Sky Sports was a big personality called Barney Francis. And I had a meeting with Barney. I was pitching an idea, and I went in with a colleague of mine, and we had a great chat. We built some rapport, and Barney was hugely charismatic and full of great stories. And I remember he said, so Hugo, right, what's your idea? So I started pitching my idea, and within 3 minutes, he just stopped me and he said, look, Hugo, I'm going to be completely honest. Don't believe it. Don't think it's going to work. If I'm being really honest, I think it's a pretty poor idea you've come up with. And I was in a state of complete shock. I went completely silent. I went straight into Adapted Child. I sort of recoiled into physically looking about 12 years old. And for about 30 seconds, I simply didn't know what to say, how to respond. And my colleague was sat there, you could see in excruciating pain, thinking this couldn't be going any worse. And I just remember vividly thinking, well, hang on a second. I've got about 55 minutes left of this meeting. I am not going to end up letting this meeting finish with me just accepting what Barney had said to me. And I remember I just stopped and thought, right, I've gone into Adapted Child. I need to get myself, which is that bit in the middle that Caron and I refer to as the adult. Because when you place yourself in adults, it kind of drags the other person, people in there with you, often reluctantly kicking and screaming. But when they don't join you and they stay somewhere else in the house, their behavior becomes immediately exposed. And I got myself into adult, and I took a long, deep pause, assessed the situation. I'll never forget. And I said, Barney, with the best will in the world, I passionately disagree with what you've just said, and I'm going to tell you why. And we had this almost like verbal game of tennis for the next half an hour, where I would get my point across and he straight back with his point. And I'll never forget, at the end of the conversation, he looked at me and he said, I'm sorry for being a bit of an arse early on. I was testing you. He said, actually, it is a very good idea. I'm just not sure it's for us, but do keep in touch. And it completely transformed the dynamic of that interaction, that conversation. And so just some of the characteristics that really help to get us and to keep us in adult. And we'll just run through those now. So really important that you do a bit of a sort of diagnostic and work out, right, where am I in this interaction? Where is the other person? We have to pause and give our brain a bit of thinking time. Take a deep breath, assess the situation, and then really think about coming in. For those of you that attended the first webinar, I spoke about performance energy. Really important that we get ourselves back into that assertive physical and vocal energy. other characteristics when we're in adult. We have to be objective. Being emotional is a no-no. The minute you become emotional, you're likely to create some kind of conflict situation off the back of it. Now, we're going to speak about active listening, because active listening is not just about listening to the words, it's about really thinking about, is the body language reflecting the words that somebody's also saying? Caron briefly touched on the appropriate questions. And we'll talk about the difference between open and closed questions in a second, and why those diagnostic questions are so important in terms of also finding out where the other person is coming from, but also takes the pressure off you. So if you find yourself on the back foot doing all the talking, asking an open question puts the onus on the other person to do some talking as well. Empathy. It's an interesting one, empathy. We don't often give it much consideration. Some people often think of it as a negative trait in business. But actually, empathy is the quickest way to diffuse a difficult situation. If somebody is in that critical parent, angry, frustrated, so often it's because they feel that they're not being listened to. Empathy doesn't necessarily mean you agree with the person. It's simply acknowledging that you hear where they're coming from. There's a big difference. Disclosure. Caron and I are great advocates of owning how you're feeling in a certain situation. I'll never forget, we had a company meeting and we all sat around our boardroom table in our old office, and we had a chap who was very great at what he did, but he was quite a challenging individual. And he suddenly got incredibly aggressive and very, very defensive and was hurling all kinds of accusations at me. And as the boss of the organization, it was very undermining. It was extremely challenging. And being really honest, it was quite painful because I was very fond of this individual. What I could easily have done was respond, got aggressive, hoofed him out the room. I could have fired a load of accusations of you're doing this and you said this and you're behaving like this that simply wouldn't have helped the situation. And I just remember saying, let me explain how I'm feeling right now. Because what's really sad for me is I really value our relationship. And over the last 10, 15 minutes, blah, blah, blah. And what was fascinating, because I owned how I was feeling rather than responding with an accusation, it suddenly created a bit of accountability to what he was doing. And I'll never forget, he went running out the room, came back about half an hour later and just said, I am so sorry. And it was because I just disclosed how it was making me feel rather than an accusation back at him that forced him to actually take a bit of responsibility for his own behavior. And it really, really works. Caron, anything to add before we talk a little bit about rapport building and open?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts about the diagnostic questions. Again, as I mentioned before, often a conversation is challenging because it's high stakes, because the subject is difficult, because the individual is difficult. Hugo described his conversation with Barney Francis there. And as I suggested also, what happens in those situations is that the primitive brain, the emotional brain, the limbic system kicks in, and we don't have full access to our rational, logical prefrontal cortex. The diagnostic questions are really important to narrow things down. Often, again, when we're under stress, we might be pitching something, say, to somebody, as Hugo was at Sky, and we think if we talk and talk and talk, we'll cover everything that they've got somewhere, we will cover what they want to hear. Diagnostic questions actually help to make what we're doing and saying more specific. Again, it takes practice to implement these things. Barney, I understand that you've said that this isn't for your organization. I'd be really interested to hear what you would be looking for. This then narrows down what they're looking for. What we can do sometimes in the scattergun talking without asking questions is cover everything except what the person's interested in and not checking in to find out what they're interested in. And just to also clarify what Hugo is saying, because empathy is really, really important. What I wanted to clarify was it is not the same as agreement. It is acknowledgement that you've heard what the person has said. The other thing I often say is specific empathy is real. Generic empathy is not. Oh, I can see that you're very upset. It's not empathy. I can hear that what I've been describing to you is not suitable for Sky. I'd really interested to understand what you would be looking for. That I understand it's not suitable for Sky is specific. That's the difference between real empathy, what I call generic empathy, which really has very little value. So just a couple of thoughts about those two things.
Something I did want to talk to you about, Karan, and this comes up a lot with clients, and that's this building rapport.
Mm-hmm.
And having the confidence to start a conversation completely away from business.
Mm.
And you and I often talk about the fact that the simple label of calling it small talk, yes, minimizes its importance. And I'd just like to hear your thoughts on why can it be so transformational when we have the confidence to actually get to know somebody slightly outside of the parameters of a work conversation?
Exactly that. We get to know the person outside of the context in which we're meeting them, which is really, really powerful and important. I do feel even now that the term rapport is something people dismiss. It's essentially about seeking to make a connection between two people. And you can only find out what those connections might be by trying it. All of these things respond to practice. I do recall, for example, doing an exercise with a very, very senior partner in a law firm. She seemed a little bit spiky, shall we say? But in the part of the interaction where we built some connection, I discovered, this is true, that she lives in the next street to me. And of course, that opens up a whole lot of things that we share in common. And that does several things. It builds a connection between two people. The other thing that seeking to make this connection can do, and talking about something outside of work, is it can settle us. Again, if we're approaching a challenging conversation, if, for example, it's a managing upwards conversation, it doesn't have to be challenging, just taking that moment to slow ourselves down, to settle our brains and recenter ourselves in having this conversation is really, really important. The other thing it can do, which is really important, obviously, my feeling is it can do many, many important things, is it can be in that preliminary phase of the interaction between the two people that the dynamic is set up, i.e., it's two-way. I will be asking questions as well. I'll be commenting on what you've said. It also can help to establish status. We are two equal people in this. And that can be established before we get into the work part of the conversation. What Hugo and I also say very often is, do not seek, because many of us are not used to building a connection effectively and confidently, we tend to exit from that part of the conversation as soon as possible. With practice, there are rewards to be gained by staying in that phase for as long as it is there. Don't seek to end it. You may find that you have a 40-minute conversation, you talk about something else, genuine and connected, for 35 minutes, and you simply agree to have another meeting to discuss what you're going to talk about. That second meeting might be more effective than if you'd had it in the first instance. So don't underestimate, in all the experience I've had with these conversations, the value of building connection between two people and what you might discover by simply being brave enough to do it. This is also where disclosure comes in. Different people have different levels of disclosure that they're comfortable with. But in order to facilitate a conversation and interaction between two people, It's worth being prepared to disclose something of oneself, one's interest, what one does, anything at all. And also somebody has revealed something to you following that line of conversation. And just to assure you of one thing, people can sometimes be concerned about being too probing or too inquiring. If you simply follow what somebody has said, what they've given you, what they've said to you, that's not intrusive. If you ask somebody off the wall, like, how many children do you have? If they haven't discussed their children, that might be considered to be intrusive. If you're following what they're giving you, that's not intrusive.
Just to add to that, Karan, because it's so interesting hearing you talk about that. Don't be scared. You spoke about disclosure, but if we are just asking questions, it can feel a little bit like an interrogation, can't it? So it's if you're going to ask somebody where they've been on holiday and what was it like and what was the food like and what did you do, you've got to be comfortable disclosing something about yourself as well, so that you can introduce, where you've been on holiday and a little bit about what your experience has been like as well. Otherwise, if it feels a bit like it's one way, people can suddenly get a bit defensive. And don't always rely on the other person. I will often start an interaction by just talking about something I've been up to. So I will start the conversation, and people inevitably will start asking questions and disclosing themselves. So again, you can't rely on the other person, particularly if someone's quite introvert. They don't necessarily always proactively start with rapport, non-work rapport. It's really important that you get comfortable initiating that.
Exactly. And I think one of the golden opportunities we have that we completely ignore is, how are you? You can say anything you want in response to that. Hugo mentioned disclosing something that you want to offer. You're going into an interaction with somebody, you might think about things you might want to talk about outside of work. That is a gem. How are you? You can use that in any way you want. You can say anything you want. It's up to you entirely what you say. What normally happens? How are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. Anyway, this meeting that we're going to, wasted opportunity.
And listening to the cues. Because so often when we're doing scenarios, somebody will mention something small and the other person hasn't properly listened and picked up that cue. So it's about developing a real sense of curiosity and interest, and that active listening bit, not just waiting for what you want to say, but really listening word by word what the other person is saying.
It's about something that's really, really important. Certainly the coaching training I had, I thought it was important. Curiosity. Curiosity generally, be it in the introductory phase of the interaction, before you start talking about what the subject is. So they could be talking about climbing the Himalayas or anything. You don't have to be interested in it particularly. I'm not interested in football at all, but somebody might say something that when they're talking about football, and what they say might interest. They might use an interesting word. Following your curiosity and also doing the same thing when the conversation then moves into the work phase. You've talked about, you've mentioned, so I can't anything. You've mentioned several times about high churn. I'm really interested to hear more about that. Anything that particularly if somebody says something more than once, repeating back the word or seeking clarification as to what's important about that particular thing to them is really, really useful. But again, all these things come with practice. The other thing I would just mention to you is just a thought about questions and a thought about what open questions sound like. Generally speaking, what's useful is to think about an open question starting with what or how. Sometimes you may not be able to think of an appropriate open question in a particular setting. There are 3 TED questions, as we call them, which are open. Tell me, explain to me, describe to me. Very useful if you're not specifically sure which road to go down or how to probe something further. Tell me, explain to me, describe to me. Very useful.
And just final point I would again just add to that, Karan, is I think we often think that we've done our little bit of rapport building, non-work up front, and that's it. I think even during the course of a meeting, you might you might spend 20 minutes focused on a business topic, and then suddenly find yourself actually having a non-work conversation again, and that's absolutely appropriate.
That's right. I'm sure that some people listening to us may think, well, I've been in situations where it's not been possible to build any rapport at the beginning because the person's not interested. That does happen. What I would then say to you is exactly what Hugo said. You are then, what's useful is to be in the mode of being aware and switched on to any opportunity when that personal connection situation arises in the conversation. They might mention a child, or I'm just, or an interest or something they did. So being on the alert to hear that, and then apply the appropriate rapport building at that particular point. So that's really, really important. A couple of questions I did notice. Rashim has asked, will you post this live as well? And Karen has asked, will the presentation be emailed, please?
So this will be sent out. There will be a link to this recording. Absolutely right. I think it's an opportune moment, Karan, to also say and introduce a little bit about Speaker Club Online, which is our online platform designed to create a community, a really safe space, often outside of people's jobs, to be able to really work on their communication skills. And Karan is going to be part of some of the online but live training that we will be providing. So just to give a flavor of how Speaker Club Online will work, there will be lots of fantastic free information, giving you videos, e-learning, lots of information on a huge variety of different communication subjects, leadership training, but also there will be the opportunity to be able to attend actual live events. So we might have a day's training on presenting with impact. We might have a half-day session with Karan and I focused on difficult conversations. But also it's an opportunity to be able to be part of a community where you can practice presenting, delivering your speeches online, being able to get fabulous feedback, to be able to give feedback. And the reason this all came about was so often with clients, people are given maybe 1 day's training in communication over the course of their career. And the problem is we go back to default positions so quickly. So Speaker Club Online, Karan and I were speaking about this earlier, is an opportunity to practice little and often. And therefore it's about creating this community of like-minded people where we can really start to make incremental improvements in our ability to communicate, which, let's be honest, I mean, Karan, I think it would be fair to say that most of the very senior folks, CEOs, board, senior execs we work with, they're not there always because of their technical skills. It's because often they are fabulous, really persuasive communicators. And these skills only become way, way more important than those technical skills as our careers develop. So look, please sign up, come and be part of our community. We'll give you the link on the next slide at the end. We are offering, by the way, a discount at the moment. We're offering 18 months instead of the normal 12 months for those early founder members. So yeah, we'd love to have you involved. We'd love to have you as part of our community. So please do join the waitlist. We've got a pretty healthy number of people who have signed up already, and we will be going live at some stage, probably mid-February, I would imagine. But just to say, Karan, just from me, as always, fabulous working together, and thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this webinar with me.
Of course, it's been a pleasure. There's some lovely feedback as well. Thank you in the chat there. particularly
Oh,
Hathra. Thank you for that.
That's lovely, and thank you all so much for joining today, and look forward to seeing you for the next one in a month's time. Take care, everybody. Karan, as always, thank you so much.
Thanks, Hugo. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Take care. Bye-bye.